So now we're going to talk about Keynesian fiscal policy. This is also called demand side policy. So the fiscal policy options are government spending and or taxation. Because this is fiscal, that's all we can do, tax and spend. So the first example is closing a recessionary gap. So if we're trying to close a recessionary gap, we can use expansionary because we want to expand the economy. Discretionary, because this is a situation where automatic stabilizers are not going to work. So we're going to be using expansionary, discretionary fiscal policy. So the first thing we can do is we can increase government spending, which will lead to an increase in aggregate demand and will be subject to something called the government spending multiplier. Or we can decrease taxes, which will also lead to an increase in aggregate demand. Excuse me, and this will be subject to what we call a tax multiplier. So any multiplier basically will multiply the effect of any action. So for example, if I were to raise taxes or lower taxes by $1, the multiplier would act in such a way that it would be as though I had done $5. That's just an example. So think about dropping a pebble into a pond and those ripples, that is the effect of a multiplier. So we're going to start with a simple Keynesian model using government spending to close the gap. And we're going to assume that a change in government spending is subject to the multiplier. So the question is, by how much should we increase government spending? So according to Keynes, recessions are the result of insufficient aggregate demand. So we need to increase aggregate demand to close the recessionary gap. So this is autonomous spending, the spending that we do when our income is zero. So autonomous spending and business investment are not likely to increase aggregate demand in this case. And the reason for that is if we're in a recession, people are watching their money more closely. So consumers are not likely to increase their spending, and businesses are doing the same. So you're in a recessionary period, people are not confident about the future, so both individuals and businesses are not likely to increase aggregate demand. So this is a time when the government is most effective because they're the only ones that can spend money. So here's our example. And notice for the first time we've got numbers here. So marginal propensity to consume. So your marginal propensity to consume in this example is 0.8. So that is a given. We are given that information. We are also given that our full potential level of real GDP is 1,200. Okay. So really this could be like, 1.2 trillion or whatever, but we're just going to use these numbers to make it easy. But we're currently at 1,000. So that means we are $200 short of our potential. All right. So we are here. We are at short run equilibrium, but we want to move aggregate demand to here so that we will be at long run equilibrium. And here's another important point about Keynes. Why is this short run aggregate demand curve flat? For Keynes, we are going to assume that there is no inflation. So if there is no inflation, there's no change in price, and that is why the short run aggregate supply curve is flat. Is that realistic? No, it's not. However, for the Keynesian model, this is one of the assumptions. So this is the situation. There is a recessionary gap, which is this triangle right here. We're at 1,000, but we want to be at 1,200. So that means that we are underperforming and we're not using all of our resources well and wisely, which means that our unemployment rate is higher than the natural rate of unemployment. All right, so the goal is to be at equilibrium at full employment. So the goal is to be here. So that means, how can we increase our output by 200 so that we're at this point? Another way to ask that is, what increase in government spending will push output up by 200? So we're given that MPC is 0.8. So that means that the autonomous spending multiplier is 1 over 0.2 or 5. How did we get there? The autonomous spending multiplier is 1 over MPS. And remember, MPC plus MPS will always equal 0. So if we know MPC, we know MPS. So just as a reminder, marginal propensity to consume, MPS, marginal propensity to save. So the autonomous spending multiplier is 1 over MPS, which in this case is going to be 5. So then we're going to set this equation up, all right? A change in Q, and Q is our quantity, which in this case is real GDP. So a change in real GDP is equal to a change in government spending. And just to say that this is any kind of spending. So this G could also be autonomous consumption, or it could be business investment. But we've already said that that's unlikely in this situation. So it's going to be G times our spending multiplier. All right? So we know Q. We don't know G. So we know Q because we know that we want to increase our output by 200. And then we know that the multiplier is 5. So now we just fill in the blanks. 200 here, that's what we want our change in output to be, equals the change in government spending, that's our unknown, times 5, which is our autonomous spending multiplier. And we get a change in government spending of $40. And in this case, we're using billions. So a $40 billion increase in government spending will lead to a $200 billion increase in output, real GDP. Okay? And here's an alternative way to solve it. So remember that GDP is also the income of a country, and Y is income. So a change in income divided by a change in government equals 1 over marginal propensity to save. So if we solve this through using the numbers that we know, 200 is the change that is desired, the change in GDP, which is the same thing as saying a change in national income, and we would get the same answer. All right? And the reason for 40 leading to a change of 200 is the multiplier. So I'm going to do the recessionary gap, the simple Keynesian model. So what if we wanted to use taxes? I'm going to do that in the next one.